I used to read Batman comic books. And Batman had this arch villain by the name of Two-Face. And Two-Face was once a prominent district attorney in Gotham City. And there was a time when some kind of acid got thrown at him and disfigured half of his face. And out of this trauma, he kind of changed from being a person that always worked for justice to a person that worked for evil. And he was so traumatized that he began to see the world in a very polarized way, one way or another. It had to do with, I guess, having two different faces in his new appearance. And so he would see things in a two-sided way, and he would make decisions on the basis of flipping a coin. And on one side of the coin, it was beautiful, it was in mint condition, and on the other side of the coin, it was all scarred and scratched, like good and evil. And in order to make any kind of decision, he would flip the coin and then do whatever the coin dictated to him. But whatever his choices were, it was always at the loss of the other side. In today's encounter with Jesus, we see that Jesus is confronted with people who see things in a very polarized way. It's one way or the other at the loss of the other way. And they were, in a sense, very two-faced. But we can also see that living in this way is very disfiguring. It doesn't create some kind of wholeness. We're broken when we live in this way. And so they bring this disfigured, broken view of the world that they both had, and they both kind of like lived on either side of the coin, Herodians for Rome, Pharisees against Rome. And they're trying to entrap Jesus with this two-sided question. And whatever way that Jesus answers, he's going to be in trouble. Do you pay the census tax through Rome or not? So if Jesus says, yes, it's okay to pay the Roman tax, the Herodians would go, yay! But the Pharisees would go, boo! And they would turn Jesus over to the religious authorities for being an apostate. If he said, no, it's wrong to pay the census tax, then the Pharisees would go, yay! And the Herodians would go, boo! And the Herodians would turn Jesus over as some kind of traitor to the Roman government. So what's a guy like Jesus to do living in a two-sided, polarized world? Well, he gives a two-sided answer, but not in the way that one might think. He says to them, repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. Well, you can't go wrong with that. It kind of pleases both sides. But if it pleases both sides, isn't that make you kind of like a big nothing? So I don't think that Jesus was trying to appease both extremes. But what I think Jesus was trying to do was trying to bring the two extremes together. Sounds more like Jesus, right? To unify. He calls forth a Roman coin, a denarius, to make his point. He says, whose image is on the coin and what inscription? Now, the denarius has an image of Caesar, and it was Tiberius Caesar, the one that was in charge at that time. And on the other side was an inscription that said, Tiberius Augustus, Caesar Tiberius Augustus, son of Augustus, the Divine One. So the coin was a way of proclaiming Caesar as God. And calling for a coin that was produced, probably from the Herodians, it was kind of interesting that they even had this coin. It betrayed their hypocrisy, for both sides really benefited, whether they liked it or not, from the Romans' presence, who allowed for the Jewish religion to still take place, and by the taxation through the Roman government, they got a lot more money than if they just had a temple tax. So, Jesus is saying to us then, in repaying to Caesar what is Caesar's and repaying to God what is God, is he's bringing both sides together, and he's saying that we don't live by one side of the coin or the other, but rather that we live as the entire coin. So that one can repay to Caesar and repay to God, but in a unified way. Oftentimes, we take this statement of Jesus of repaying to Caesar what is Caesar and to God what is God as a way of separating out the extremes. You got the Caesars on one side and the God on the other side. And where Caesar is all of the sort of like secular interests that we may have. Could be our causes, could be our hobbies, could be our professions, could be all very good things, but somehow we separate them out from God. And God is kind of all of like the praying and all like the holy stuff. And when we separate them out like that, we become really disfigured. We really become torn. Because we love the things that we do in the secular world, and yet we know we should love God as well. And if we make our lives like two-sided, then we may love God in a resentful way because we have to give up all of these secular things, or we might throw ourselves into the secular things and feel terribly guilty about ignoring God. Well, Jesus says it doesn't have to be that way. We can love God and do the secular things as well. But there is a price. And that price is that we have to recognize that God is the one in charge. God is the ruler of all. God is the one that's going to save us. None of the secular things will, though they might make us feel good momentarily. So if we recognize that God is the one that's in charge and that God is worthy of all our praise, then all of the secular worldly things we do can be colored by this worship, this glory we give to God. So that all of the things that we do, whether it's our profession, whether it's our hobbies or our leisure, or our causes that we involve ourselves in, whatever they may be, we can do all of these things colored by our praise to God. It's kind of like the mixing of the water and wine in the Eucharist, where the wine represents the vast divinity and love of God, and the water, our human existence. And when the chalice is consecrated, it has the vast amount of God's grace in the wine mingled with the work of human hands with the water. And that the water mingled with the wine is colored, is flavored by the graces of God. So our lives are invited to be by Jesus Christ. Living our Pauline Jaricot, Blessed Pauline Jaricot, gives us a good example of what this might mean. Pauline Jaricot was born of an affluent family who was involved in many things in the city of Lyon in France. And Pauline had this conversion experience on Christmas when she turned 18. And she sort of changed her life in a way from living one that was so self-absorbed to one that was totally focused on others, but focused on others in a way that was colored by God. So one of her brothers had this silk factory, and so she decided that she was going to associate herself with all the workers in the factory. So she began to dress like, especially the young women that were of her age. And she started gathering them together, started praying, started to think of the world a little differently by looking at the world a little differently. And then her other brother, who happened to be a priest, was involved in this cause of preaching the good news to other parts of the world, and particularly in Asia. And they didn't have the resources for it. And Pauline discovered this, and so she figured she was going to find some creative way to help. So she asked these young women that she was spending a lot of time with and praying if once a week they gave a small coin, like a penny. And they were able to afford that, and over time she began to acquire a large amount of money, which she then gave to her brother in the missions. And it became so popular and so widespread, because that's how it started. I think it ended up with taking up collections in the churches. That was creative at that day. That was really creative. And it got so organized and so successful that people were jealous of her. But she kept her view on the purpose, which was to praise God. So instead of feeling put down, and she probably did to some degree, about all the accusations oh, she's raising all this money, she's a rich woman, she's probably taking some of this for herself, that she puts this in the hands of another group of people. It's a society which became the Society of the Propagation of the Faith. It's one of the pontifical missions that we support today on World Mission Sunday. Later in life, she has this other idea, always with the cause of working for the poor, which, by the way, you can do without having any kind of coloring for God. But she always colored her working for the poor by her love of God. And so she had this idea of creating a model factory. A model factory where working conditions would be much improved, where everyone would get paid a just wage, where children of the families that work there would be educated and supported by the factory, and that just an atmosphere in both work and family life would be a Christian atmosphere. This was her model factory life. And this was like before social justice. And she started this other new collection to make this a reality. And it was called the Bank of Heaven. And this Bank of Heaven, she entrusted to these other financiers who she trusted. But the financiers embezzled all the money. And now she was in a predicament where she was in great debt. She was popular when she was successful. Now nobody wanted to know her. But she always colored her existence on her praise and honor to God. She worked tirelessly to repay the debt, but no one wanted to know her. Even the Society of the Propagation of the Faith, which she helped founded, didn't want to help her. Now, in my own way of thinking, I'm thinking, isn't this funny that the Propagation of the Faith didn't want to know her when she needed help, and now that she's recognized as blessed and beatified, all the literature for the Pontifical Society has pictures of her and stories about her and all of these things. Isn't it kind of funny? Huh. But that's me. Pauline Jaricot didn't see it that way. She recognized that this was the way of God. She recognized that that money that she helped raise was for the missions. It wasn't for her. And she was totally accepting of the reality, much more than me in my own judgmental ways. She died a pauper. She never was able to recoup the debt. She died in utter failure, in spite of all her successes. And yet she is recognized for her holiness. Why? Because she lived the entire coin. She had her entire life colored by the grace of God. My brothers and sisters, then, we are invited to live the life of a coin, knowing that the image that we have on one side of the coin is the image of God, that we are all divine in a way, or have divine potential, because we have been created in the image of God. And on the other side of the coin, we are inscribed with the motto, we are beloved children of God, with whom God is well pleased. That's who we are as a coin. Can we today reflect upon how the life we live in the secular world, where God seems so totally absent, how can we bring the presence of the living God, which we are here this Sunday to worship, into a way of coloring the world, the life that we live? Where is there room for a little more color? Where is there room for a little more flavor of God? We are called to live the life of a divine coin, bringing both sides together in unity, harmony, and peace, because God sees us not as small change.